Law enforcement, courts, and churches support animal cruelty, either actively or passively. This is Dr. Mark, animal advocate, longtime rescuer, author, publisher, and former deputy sheriff. Right now, in communities across the country, animals are being starved, beaten, and left to die. And the people who could stop it, law enforcement, the courts, and even churches, are too often ignoring it. Why? Many police officers and sheriff's departments do not prioritize animal abuse cases. They often see them as low-priority crimes or dismiss them as civil matters. Some departments lack proper training in animal cruelty investigations, leading to weak cases that don't result in arrests or convictions. Officers may even return abused animals to abusers instead of ensuring their protection. There's often no dedicated animal control or enforcement in many areas, allowing neglect and cruelty to persist. How did we get here? Why do law enforcement, courts, and religious institutions fail the most vulnerable among us? Today, we're going to expose the truth. Let's start with law enforcement. In most parts of the United States, police officers are not trained in animal cruelty investigations. Many see it as a nuisance rather than a crime. The result? Animal abuse cases are ignored, mishandled, or dismissed entirely. Less than 20% of reported animal abuse cases lead to prosecution. Animal cruelty cases often expose serious gaps in law enforcement's response to neglect and abuse. One heartbreaking example comes from Hartford, Connecticut, where a dog suffered a slow, preventable death due to inaction and failure to intervene. In January 2018, concerned neighbors reported a dog left chained outside in brutal winter conditions for weeks. The dog's owner had been incarcerated on unrelated charges, allegedly leaving arrangements for the pet's care. However, those arrangements clearly failed as the dog was left to suffer in freezing temperatures. Despite repeated warnings about the conditions, authorities took no immediate action. When help finally arrived, it was too late. The dog had frozen to death. Shockingly, no arrests were made, leaving animal advocates and the community outraged at the lack of justice. This case exemplifies a widespread issue. Law enforcement often does not treat animal cruelty as a serious crime. Even when clear signs of neglect are present, officers may hesitate to take action due to weak laws, lack of training, or simply not viewing animal welfare as a priority. In many instances, this failure results in unnecessary suffering and death. What message does this send? That abusers can get away with it, that animals don't matter. But we know better, and we need law enforcement to do better. Leaving animals exposed to extreme weather without shelter is not just cruel, it's lethal. Cases like this demonstrate why stronger laws, stricter enforcement, and better training for officers are essential. If authorities had intervened earlier, this dog's life could have been saved. Stronger laws. Every state must implement and enforce strict anti-neglect laws that criminalize leaving pets outside in extreme weather without proper shelter. Better training for law enforcement. Officers must receive education on recognizing and responding to animal neglect before it becomes fatal. Public awareness and advocacy. Community members must continue reporting cases of neglect and demanding action when authorities fail to intervene. If you witness an animal suffering from neglect or extreme weather exposure, report it immediately and follow up. If authorities fail to act, escalate the issue to animal welfare organizations or media outlets. Every voice matters in the fight against animal cruelty. This tragedy should serve as a wake-up call. No animal deserves to die alone, cold, and forgotten. It's time for law enforcement to take these cases seriously and for communities to demand justice for animals in need. In a shocking case that raises serious concerns about the failure of law enforcement to address animal cruelty, a dog trainer in Brooklyn, New York, has been accused of abusing animals under his care, yet remains in operation. Despite more than 30 complaints from concerned neighbors and disturbing video evidence allegedly showing him kicking and whipping dogs, authorities have failed to take significant action. For over 5 years, residents have reported the trainer's behavior, pleading for intervention, yet police visits have resulted in little more than temporary scrutiny, with officials often concluding that they found no clear evidence of wrongdoing. The city's Department of Health has opened an investigation, But in the meantime, this unlicensed facility continues to house and train dogs, leaving many to question whether current laws are sufficient to protect animals from harm. This case exemplifies a troubling pattern in animal abuse investigations, where repeated complaints and even visual evidence are often not enough to prompt immediate action. A lack of training among officers in handling cruelty cases combined with bureaucratic red tape creates an environment where abusers slip through the cracks. Without swift intervention, animals remain at risk while those responsible for their suffering face minimal consequences. Studies show that individuals who harm animals are more likely to engage in other violent behaviors, making animal abuse not just a moral issue, but also a public safety concern. When authorities fail to act decisively on these cases, they send a dangerous message. That animal cruelty is not a priority, and perpetrators can act with impunity. Law enforcement agencies must receive better training on identifying and prosecuting animal cruelty cases. Laws should be strengthened to impose harsher penalties for abuse, and oversight should be improved to ensure that complaints lead to real consequences. The public also plays a crucial role. By continuing to report suspected abuse and advocating for stronger protections, we can push for a system that prioritizes animal welfare. If this case teaches us anything, it's that silence enables cruelty. The public must demand more from law enforcement, lawmakers, and local officials. If you see animal abuse, report it, and follow up. Contact your representatives and urge them to support stronger animal protection laws. Support local shelters and advocacy groups working tirelessly to give animals a voice. Animals cannot speak for themselves. It's up to us to make sure their cries for help are heard and answered. Even when law enforcement does its job, the courts often fail to deliver justice. Most animal cruelty cases are treated as misdemeanors. Offenders get probation, small fines, or the charges are dismissed altogether. Imagine if we treated child abuse this way. Would we tolerate it? Of course not. But when the victim is an animal, the justice system looks the other way. We need stricter penalties. No more slaps on the wrist. We need judges who take these cases seriously. We need real consequences for real crimes against animals. Churches preach love, kindness, and compassion. But where is their voice when it comes to animals? Why do most religious institutions ignore the suffering of God's creatures? Church leaders who ignore suffering, whether human or animal, fail to act according to their moral responsibility. By turning a blind eye, they become complicit in cruelty. This passage is often applied to helping people, but it also applies to all of God's creatures. If church leaders ignore suffering, they neglect their duty to honor God's creation. Super Matthew 25:45 NIV. He will reply, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me." Many churches host food drives, shelter homeless people, and provide aid for the sick. But when was the last time you heard a pastor speak about animal cruelty? When was the last time a church collected donations for an animal shelter? Worse, some churches actively participate in animal cruelty, supporting events that harm animals instead of protecting them. It's time for religious leaders to stand up and say, "We will not ignore this any longer." So what can we do? We can demand change. We can pressure law enforcement to take animal cruelty seriously. We can call for tougher penalties in courtrooms, and we can challenge churches to live up to their teachings of compassion. Report animal abuse and follow up. Don't let cases disappear. Push for stricter laws in your city and state. Contact lawmakers. Ask your church to take a stand. Suggest sermons on kindness to animals, donation drives for shelters, or rescue partnerships. Share this video and start conversations. Animals can't speak for themselves, but we can, and we must. Because every day we stay silent, more animals suffer. It's time to demand justice, compassion, and action. Are you with me? I want everyone to think about what was just viewed. Think about how you have neglected an animal one way or another, and how your soul may be affected by your total lack of stewardship for all God's creations. God entrusted us with His world, not just to take from it, but to care for every living being within it. From this day forward, I urge you to look at yourself and ask, what can I do to make this situation better? How can I stand up for those who have no voice? It's not enough to feel bad, we must act. Because the way we treat animals is a reflection of who we truly are, and one day, we will all answer for it.